This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Daniel Joseph Ricciardo, the Honey Badger, has been a stalwart on the F1 grid since his debut in 2011. I love him, you love him, but right now the sport just don't love him back. Last year was a difficult debut season at McLaren. His Monza victory was a glimmer of hope in what was otherwise a very disappointing season. 2022 hasn't started much better. With McLaren aiming to challenge at the top once again, Zach Brown openly saying that Daniel hasn't been meeting expectations and an ever increasing pool of hungry young drivers waiting in the wings. In my opinion, it's now or never for the 32-year-old. He needs to show McLaren he is the driver that they've paid the big bucks for. Otherwise, his place not only in the team but in F1 at large could be at risk. Let's talk about it. There is a roast inbound, but before we get into that, I think Daniel Ricciardo, positive vibes first, because there are good things that you can't look past. Positives that should be acknowledged when we're looking at Daniel Ricciardo, because I firmly believe that the talent, the core racing talent, is still there, no question. Monza proved that. Give the man a car he feels comfortable, confident in, and he will deliver. He said it himself in the race when he took the lead going into turn one. He went into autopilot because he's been there before. He's won Grand Prix, he's led laps. That ain't a problem for him. He tapped into every piece of experience that he has to convert on merit that weekend as well. That wasn't a lucky result. Whatever they did with that slippery as McLaren, they got it into a window and they delivered with Daniel at the wheel. 8 race wins in his Formula One career, usurped Sebastian Vettel in Red Bull in 2014. Should really have 2 Monaco Grand Prix victories under his belt, which again is arguably the most driver talent sensitive track on the calendar. The point is, yes, it's very easy to criticise Daniel Ricciardo right now, but the man clearly has talent. He clearly has shown multiple times how capable he is. What's the old saying? Form is temporary, class is permanent. There are a multitude of factors going on contributing to why Daniel Ricciardo just isn't delivering at the moment, and his core racing talent and ability I don't think is one of them. Then, of course, you can't talk about Daniel Ricciardo and positives without talking about his vibe, his energy. Daniel's presence and his approach in that team can only have a positive impact as far as I'm concerned. Like, trust me, the overwhelming majority of other drivers on the grid, if they were in Daniel's shoes right now, they would be absolute to work with. He's smiling through the paint, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure behind the scenes things are a bit more prickly than what we get to see, but no question the way that Daniel carries himself, even on team radio, typically he's very to the point. He doesn't get caught up in the emotions too much. I think that's a real strength of his that not only looks nice, but it means the team are going to want to fight harder to make it work for him because they clearly like him. Hence why the commercial side is so strong for him as well. He is one of the most high-profile Formula One drivers in the world. In the USA, he's probably the most high-profile, up there with Lewis for sure. And we know how important that market is, not just to McLaren, but to F1 as a whole. I mean, that Lando-Daniel combination, the commercial clout there is nothing to be scoffed at. And the reality is that that is only going to buy Daniel more time compared to another driver who doesn't have the same following. Because I do think that priority number one, the best outcome for McLaren is to enable Daniel to switch it on and get back to those previous levels of performance. I think that's the best option because he ticks so many boxes. I don't think McLaren want to replace him. I do think they're invested in helping him as much as you can reasonably expect them to be. And if they can get him back to his best, a firing Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris driving the way he's driving at the minute, that is arguably performance-wise one of the best driver pairings on the grid, and definitely commercially the best driver pairing on the grid. My last Squarespace ad read, I showed you Sebastian Vettel's website. Well, Daniel Ricciardo has a very slick website. There's nice McLarens everywhere, his nice shirts, his helmets, posters, loads of lovely imagery. He's got his wine bits up here. That's the thing, when you have your own website, you can showcase whatever you want. You can have it as an e-commerce online store, you can have it as a blog, you can run it as a portfolio, whatever you want. Squarespace is the perfect all-in-one platform to bring your dreams of having your very own beautiful website to life. There's no coding knowledge needed. Thousands of beautiful templates, 24/7 customer support to make sure you're super happy with whatever you manage to create. And of course, if you do want to give it a go, play around with functionality, you can, and it's free of charge. It's only when you want to put your website live to the world that you have to pay anything. So once you've got that dream website ready to go live, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain main. Okay, that was nice. Now for the not so nice. It's that time, I'm afraid. Take a seat at the table, get your dinner plate out, and it's time for the roast. Because look, 2021, his first year at McLaren, started pretty promising. First 4 races, it was 3-1 to Lando in head-to-heads. But again, considering it's a new car, he's got a whole new environment, teammate, all this pressure and expectation, because there was a lot of it coming into McLaren. You could forgive Lando having the stronger start. Then we got to round 5 and Lando lapped Daniel at Monaco. That was a really poignant moment because that must have really, really hurt. Again, I've already said it, Daniel should have 2 Monaco wins under his belt. You could go as far to have called him a Monaco specialist and then gets dunked on like that. And unfortunately, that kind of set the tone for the season. It was 15-7 to Lando in race head-to-heads, 15-7 to Lando in qualifying head-to-heads as well. 45 points between them, partially saved, of course, by the Daniel win in Monza, 7-point offset because of course Lando finished P2. There would be an odd race in 21 where Daniel would kind of look on pace. He did well in Austin, but then Lando would just batter him for the next 2-3 races pretty comfortably, and it was just weird. I mean, Danny's average finishing position over the course of the whole season was over 2 places behind Lando, and they make a different strategy call. In Russia, he's winning. He finished P7 in the end because he didn't, cocked it up. Imagine how big that gap would have been if Lando had converted there as well. And unfortunately for McLaren, Daniel's complete lack of consistency cost them P3 in the constructors' fight against Ferrari because, of course, Carlos Sainz, who had just gone the other way to Ferrari, and part of the reason why Daniel's first season at McLaren looked so bad was because Carlos was doing such a good job. He had a new car, he had a new team, he had a new environment to get used to, and he was almost matching Charles Leclerc, who's, again, one of the most highly regarded drivers in the sport. This only exacerbated Daniel's problems. Not only why was Carlos able to do so well in the Ferrari, but again, this is a Carlos Sainz who just about slightly, only by a few points, and performances were similar, but I do think he probably had the edge on Lando in their first 2 seasons together at McLaren in 2019 and 20. If Daniel's so great, why is he nowhere near? But you know what, it's fine. 2021, again, Lando was used to the car. Daniel wasn't. 2022, beautiful, fresh slate, new car for everyone. No one's carrying any car knowledge. A return to Daniel Ricciardo of old. No, that's just not how it's gone, really, is it? In qualifying, it's particularly bad. It's 6-1 to Lando, and the only dub for Daniel came because Lando marginally track extended in Catalonia. And also, he, was pretty much dead in that cabin with tonsillitis, and he still probably should have outqualified Daniel and still beat him in the race. To be fair, for the first 3 races of the year, the head-to-head actually looked pretty close. So Bahrain was a mess for both McLarens. We all thought they were completely mudded, and Lando went some weird strategy, ended up finishing behind Daniel. But then in Saudi Arabia, Daniel had a technical fault, and actually in the race, they were running pretty close. So that was positive. And in Australia, that was a good weekend for McLaren. You had Lando P5, Daniel P6. Daniel's still behind, but it's 1 place. I mean, it wasn't too bad. It looked like Daniel had taken a step forward, at least relative to 2021. And the last 4 races have not looked like that. Daniel was at fault for that messy tangle with Carlos Sainz at Imola, which ruined his race early. Lando would grab a P3 podium. Lando was also pretty well clear of Daniel in Miami before he got punted by Gasly. And Spain and Monaco have, again, been pretty convincing victories for Lando relative to his teammate. 48 points for Norris, just 11 for Ricciardo. This is not what he needed. This is not what I expected. There were reasonable excuses for last year, but now I think we're all out of them, to be honest. You got to remember, right, this is Daniel's 11th year in the sport, and he's comfortably being beaten by a kid who's almost 11 years younger than Daniel. The career of Daniel has had some very, very high peaks, and it's had some difficult troughs, but right now, this 2022 McLaren, as things stand, as of this day, he is deep in a pretty substantial trough, I feel. Questions have been asked ever since he decided to make the pretty shock decision to leave Red Bull at the end of 2018. So I think what we should do is have a brief look at these changes, these moves, reflect on where he has been to really understand where he is now. Because again, Daniel's decision to leave Red Bull after 5 seasons at the team shocked everyone including Christian Horner. I mean, his first season, 2014, 2016 as well, they were impeccable. And, when Max did rock up to the team, Daniel never really looked out of his depth relative to Max Verstappen at all, I didn't think anyway. 2015 was a little bit of a chink in the armour because Daniel Kvyat did beat him by like 3 points in the end, so there was very, very little in it. But ultimately, he was never upstaged during his time at Red Bull. Ever. DNFs were rife for him in 2018, and obviously that played a big part in why he left, although he did leave to go to Renault, who were the engine providers of the car that he was in. I think it was more to do with the team seemingly shifting focus towards Max, which obviously right now we can all sit here and be like, well, yeah, of course, like Max is the focus for that team. But at the time, you've got this young kid coming in, is making your life uncomfortable. There was always going to be tension there. Baku 2018, we all remember that one. And, he felt that the team sided more with Max. His nose was a bit put out. He didn't think Red Bull would deliver him the world title as long as Max was there. And he decided to leave. Now, was that the wrong decision? Honestly, I'm kind of torn because I can see it from both point of views pretty clearly, I feel. Like, yes, Max is the golden boy. Do I think Daniel would have done a better job against Max relative to Gasly, Albon and Perez in 2021? I do. But I still don't think he would have got the opportunity to have a proper crack at the title. I think Max is the better driver, and I think he would have got more support from the team. Now, don't get me wrong, Checo just won at Monaco, right, last weekend, smashed it, and he's not far off of Max, but again, I still see this as a Max Verstappen championship. I would be absolutely gobsmacked if Sergio is able to beat Max this year on merit. But maybe if Daniel had stayed and then you got these 2022 regulations, fresh sheet of paper, maybe Max had the edge before, but that would have given Daniel an opportunity, with a reset, with this new car to maybe assert himself in that team. There's so much speculation. Do I think Daniel would have joined a title fight with Verstappen, with Leclerc? Maybe. But I think the biggest thing to take away from the Red Bull thing is, yes, he did leave, but he left on a high. He left in demand. Again, Red Bull didn't want him to leave, but he walked out the door, drove an hour down the road to Enstone to Renault. A team that he'd have a okay first season in 2019, but have an absolute stormer in 2020. Again, first season jumping in alongside Nico Hülkenberg, already established at the team, by the way. Yet came in, did a better job, managed a P4 in Monza, best result, and was usually finishing 2 to 3 positions ahead of Nico Hülkenberg. But then Hulk was out, Ocon was in for 2020, and that's when Daniel switched those afterburners on. Arguably, driver of the year for sure. 119 points versus Esteban's 62. Only 6 points behind Sergio Perez, who probably was driver of the season. Shout out Pierre Gasly as well, because he had a great 2020. 2 podiums, 3 P4s, just 1 DNF in the first race of the season. Only out the points twice for the remainder of it. You know what? I actually think I understand Daniel's decision to leave Red Bull more than I understand his decision to leave Renault. Because, late 20s, I can understand, partly just wanting a different challenge and trying something new. Moved to Renault, cool, okay first season. Really good 2020. Loads of momentum he could have built on if he'd stayed there. But now I think in hindsight, that move away looks like a big mistake. A bigger mistake than leaving Red Bull, arguably, in my opinion. He'd found the rhythm. He was firmly on top of his teammate. He was the number one driver, and they could have carried that feel into their 2021 and now their 2022 new regulation car as well. Because to be honest, I think right now the Alpine and McLaren, in terms of car performance, is pretty close. I think Lando's the differentiating factor because I think he's driving at a higher level than Ocon, than Alonso right now. Daniel could and maybe should have stayed, but he decided not to, and he took the drive down to Woking to McLaren. Because I think the overwhelming majority of us expected Daniel to come in and push McLaren forward and Lando forward as well. We've always experienced that multiple teams, multiple race wings actually able to hang with Max in the same car. He'd just come off the back of such a good season. There were very few reasons to not think this could work. Yet in reality, relative to Lando, he's almost kind of fallen foul in the same way that Gasly and Albon in particular fell foul to Max at Red Bull. Join a new team, you've got this younger teammate who really fits with this feel of car. And there's a lot talked about this Red Bull, well, the old Red Bull particularly, being very pointy and hard to drive. I know Carlos and Daniel have noted about how it is quite an odd car to drive, at least the 2021 spec. But yeah, Lando, Max, both young, both killing it, both got the full support, long-term contracts with their teams, and their older teammates haven't been able to come in and adapt to that car and get anywhere near, really. But also another interesting note, which is another kicker, because I think there's so many questionable, in hindsight, it's very easy to say in hindsight, but in hindsight, very questionable decisions. McLaren could have been an option, was an option to Daniel when he originally left Red Bull. It was Renault, it was McLaren. They both wanted him. He decided to go with Renault, but instead Carlos Sainz would come in and Lando Norris would come in as a rookie to McLaren, replacing Alonso and Van Dorn. That would have been an opportunity because, right at the start of Lando's career, he was nervous, fair enough, rightly so, like rookie in his first season. He wasn't driving at the top level straight away. If Daniel had gone to McLaren straight away, could he have shaped that direction and that car and that philosophy more in a direction that he would have been comfortable with and been able to deliver on? Because he'd have probably established himself in that first season as the dominant driver, and Lando would have had to kind of maybe follow his direction. But as things are, it's very much the opposite. But I do think there is part of this conversation that is quite often overlooked, and I don't want to do that. I want to try and give credit where credit is due, because maybe, just maybe, actually Lando is just that good. Most of us, we talk about Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, in no particular order, okay? I'm not looking to flame any fan bases here. These drivers being the best drivers on the grid, right? But in part, that is because they've all had the opportunity to drive either joint or the best car on the grid. So obviously Lewis, the Mercedes dominance years, obviously. Leclerc, that Ferrari was quickest car at times in 2019 and obviously now in 2022. Max Verstappen had at times again the quickest car in 2021, and again now in 2022 he's able to fight on merit at the top. Yes, Lando has had opportunities up towards the front and has mostly delivered. He's got plenty of podiums under his belt now. Obviously, Russia will always hurt, but you can't be too harsh on Lando for that because it was such a weird, changeable... Leclerc made exactly the same mistake and we don't meme on him that much. It's just because Lando lost the win that... I think he deserved the win for that race. He put it on pole, delivered a fantastic race in that McLaren, just caught out at the end. These things happen. But who is to say that Lando isn't on the level of these three? You can't. It's impossible to say that he's not. Partly because he's only been at one team. Fair enough. Stick him in a Red Bull. Is he as quick? Maybe not. But in his stint at McLaren, he's done so well, so consistently. Maybe he is just that good. And none of us are seeing it. I do actually remember doing a poll in a live stream like last week, and I asked if you thought Lando Norris right now is better than Daniel Ricciardo in his prime, and 70% still said Ricciardo prime is better. But is that in part because Daniel had the car to win races and therefore really showcase how quick he was, whereas Lando's never had that? I think so. At the end of the day, whatever car McLaren has built for 2022, Lando is making work. So well, just as well as he was making last year's car work. Yet Daniel can't seem to carry the speed in the low speed corners like Lando can. That seems to be, from the data, the biggest discrepancy between the two of them. But particularly in this cost cap era, are McLaren going to go to the additional expense of spending all this time trying to build a separate philosophy of car to suit Daniel's style? Because the car that Lando can drive fast, Daniel can't. Of course they're not. More than ever, they're not going to do that now. Daniel has to make it work. And right now, he's not. And he can't afford to leave on a down, because if he wants to stay in Formula 1, he needs to be in the shop window. With Red Bull, he left on a high. With Renault, he left on a high. But it's a lot more difficult to guarantee yourself a seat elsewhere if you've left after taking such a drubbing. I mean, Seb, for example, had a very poor 2020, but he got the Aston Martin seat based off of the merit he'd established over his career by winning 4 world titles. Daniel doesn't have that. You've got Colton Herta, who's been touted for an F1 seat for a while now, only 22, done a quality job in Indy, now is with McLaren in a development role as well as doing Indy. Of course, that's kind of maybe a segue into F1. He will make an FP1 appearance at some point. He also raced with Lando in 2015 in British F4s and didn't finish that far behind him. I think he's definitely potential F1 caliber, for sure. Then you got Pato O'Ward, who's also in IndyCar, but he's actually at the McLaren team. He's 23. Almost won the Indy 500 last weekend. So close. I was gutted, I'm not going to lie. Although he has just signed an extension with the IndyCar team till 2025, so the chance of him getting a full-time F1 seat is probably unlikely. Then we've got Oscar Piastri. I mean, you know, if Alonso really does stay at that team and Ocon doesn't leave either, and I don't see why, especially Ocon, why they'd get rid of him. Alonso, you can make the, you know, long-term versus short-term argument between him and Piastri, but if they keep with their lineup, then surely, like, he needs an F1 seat, this kid. Could be an opportunity for McLaren to swoop him and buy him out of his Alpine contract. Don't know how much that's worth, but if they really wanted him, I'm sure they could make it happen. What about whoever wins F2 this year? I mean, Felipe Drogovic is absolutely bossing it. He's not affiliated with any teams. You've got Teo Pourchaire, Doohan, Iwasa, Vips, Sargent. There's loads of young rookies looking to prove a point. Whoever wins F2, I think, is going to clearly be putting their hand up potentially. And then, of course, there is Pierre Gasly, the man that we've been talking about for about 20 years in terms of who he's going to sign for next. But with Sergio Perez announcing a contract extension earlier this week to 2024, that all but confirms that Pierre's not going to get into that Red Bull seat. And you know what? I think Perez deserves the seat, to be honest. He's really stepped up in a big way this year, and I'm super happy for him. But I think that indicates that Gasly's future is away from the Red Bull family. Why would he want to stay in the only junior team on the grid where he could move somewhere else and potentially build up another team? And also for Red Bull's point of view, like, why keep a driver that you know is not going to, you know, get the Red Bull seat when you could give his seat to this pool of juniors that you've got coming through who are looking super promising? Surely McLaren are considering Pierre as an option even more now, again, with the Sergio contract news. He's not had an amazing start to 2022. Granted, he literally crashed into Lando in Miami, but 2020 and 2021, for me, he was candidate both seasons for Driver of the Year. He's 26, 6 years younger than Daniel, and I mean, you know, would it be a bit intimidating for him jumping in to a team alongside a younger teammate who's very, very established? Because again, that's kind of Max Verstappen Red Bull vibes. But I think that was a long time ago. I think Pierre learned a lot from that experience, and I think he's a very different driver and a different person now. Question is, would he do a better job than Daniel? I mean, look, if I had that answer, then, you know, this would be ringing with Zach Brown on it. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question, but maybe we'll get to find out. McLaren have a driver for both the present and the future in Lando Norris. But Daniel Ricciardo is 10 years older than Lando, remember. He's at a very different stage of his career, very different stage of his life. McLaren will go on long after Daniel Ricciardo eventually retires from Formula One, whenever that will be. And they want to guarantee their success in the future because there's been so much investment into the team and it's moving in a very positive direction. So will the foreseeable future be with Daniel? I really, really, really hope they are able to find some kind of solution. When I say they, in part I mean McLaren, but I do think most of this is on Daniel. With his experience, he shouldn't be getting violated like this. Everything we're saying now, I am sure he is acutely aware of, but it comes the time, it's top tier sport, and he needs to step up. Have there been any indications of an improvement? At least maybe there's those first 3 races. Australia, he seemed to ride off the good vibes in Australia. He seemed to ride off the good vibes in Austin. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a very good quota this year, which again, maybe that kind of tells me that it's a mental game at tracks where he's strong. You know, Monza, he's always run well and he won there last year. Kota, he did a really good job there last year. It's a mental game that he's fighting more than it is, you know, his engineers being at problem or the car or the environment or any of that. I think that is the biggest issue. I could be wrong, but that's the way I'm interpreting it. His current deal ends at the end of next season, but if things don't change, I can't see him in that car next year because he can't go on for another year and a half the way things are, not like this. But I really, truly hope he's able to turn it around because that would be a fantastic, poignant, wonderful redemption arc, and I love them, especially for a lad like Daniel because I think he's a cracking bloke. That's me done. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you're new and you want to see more. Thank you very much again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.